On July 16th, 2026, a startup most people have never heard of dropped a bomb on the entire artificial intelligence industry. While Silicon Valley was busy spending hundreds of billions of dollars building the next generation of AI behind closed doors, a company in Beijing called Moonshot AI quietly released a model called Kimi K3, 2.8 trillion parameters, the largest open-weight AI model ever released. And here is the part that made Wall Street lose its mind. They are giving it away for free. Within 72 hours, US semiconductor stocks lost over $3.3 trillion in market value. JP Morgan called it the DeepSeek 2.0 moment. Elon Musk looked at the benchmarks and posted a single word: impressive. And the White House. The White House accused Moonshot AI of stealing American technology. This is the story of how a 3-year-old Chinese startup turned the global AI race upside down. And by the end of this, you will understand why some of the smartest people in the world believe the age of American AI dominance may already be over. Before we go any further, you need to understand something about the current state of AI. Right now, the biggest American AI companies are in an arms race. OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, and Meta are all spending tens of billions of dollars every single quarter trying to outbuild each other. Their models are getting bigger, their data centers are consuming more electricity than some small countries, and their prices keep climbing. The assumption in Silicon Valley has been that this kind of spending creates an unbreakable moat. Nobody else can afford to compete at this level. That assumption just died. Let me tell you exactly what Kimi K3 is, because the numbers alone are staggering. This model has 2.8 trillion parameters. To put that in perspective, the original ChatGPT that blew everyone's minds back in late 2022 had 175 billion parameters. Kimi K3 is roughly 16 times larger. But raw size is not what makes this model special. What makes it special is the architecture underneath it. Kimi K3 uses something called a mixture of experts design. The model contains 896 individual expert modules, but when you send it a request, it does not activate all of them. It picks just 16. 16 out of 896. That means it gets the intelligence of a massive model while only using the computing power of a much smaller one. This is not brute force. This is engineering precision. Think of it like a hospital with 896 specialist doctors. When a patient comes in with a heart problem, you do not call all 896 doctors into the room. You call the 16 cardiologists who are actually relevant. That is what Mixture of Experts does. It routes each request to the specific parts of the model that are most qualified to handle it. The result is a model that punches far above its weight class in efficiency. The model also comes with a 1 million token context window. Most AI models can handle somewhere between 8,000 and 128,000 tokens at a time. Kimi K3 handles 1 million. That means you can feed it an entire code base, an entire legal contract, an entire research paper, and it will hold all of it in memory while working on your problem. It accepts text, images, and video as inputs. It reasons through complex problems step by step. And on the front-end code arena, a blind testing platform where developers submit prompts and rate the output without knowing which model produced it, Kimi K3 scored 1679. First place. It beat every model from OpenAI. It beat every model from Anthropic. It beat every model from Google. A Chinese startup that most American tech workers could not name 6 months ago just took the top spot in one of the most respected coding benchmarks in the industry. Now, here is where the story gets really interesting. Artificial Analysis, one of the most trusted independent AI evaluation organizations, gave Kimi K3 a score of 57 on their intelligence index. That places it 4th out of 189 models they have tested. The only models that ranked higher were Anthropic's Claude Fable 5, and two specific configurations of OpenAI's GPT 5.6 Sol. Kimi K3 ranked above Claude Opus 4.8, above GPT 5.5, above every other model on the planet, and the cost per task, 95 cents. Compare that to Anthropic's flagship model at $2.75 per task. Kimi K3 delivers near-identical intelligence at roughly one-third the price. But the benchmark that really caught people's attention was the agentic testing. These are evaluations that measure how well an AI can operate autonomously, taking actions using tools, navigating complex multi-step workflows without a human guiding every click. Kimi K3 scored first place on Automation Bench with 53% and first place on Harvey L-Ab with 95%. These are not toy benchmarks. These are simulations of real-world enterprise work. And a Chinese model just outperformed every American competitor. Let me tell you about the man behind this, Yang Jilin. He is 33 years old. He studied at Carnegie Mellon University. He worked at Meta. He worked at Google. Then he went back to China, and in April 2023, he registered a company called Beijing Moonshot AI technology with a starting capital of roughly $148,000. 3 years later, that company is in talks for a pre-IPO funding, rounded a valuation of $50 billion. $50 billion. From 148,000 to $50 billion in 3 years. That might be the fastest wealth creation story in the history of artificial intelligence. And what makes it even more remarkable is the context. This happened under US export controls, designed specifically to slow down Chinese AI development. Yang Jilin built this without access to the most advanced American chips. He built it while Washington was actively trying to cut his supply lines. And he still delivered a model that sits in the top 4 on the planet. Yang Jilin did not build Kimi K3 by copying what American companies were doing. He replaced the foundations. At NVIDIA's GTC 2026 conference, he presented a technical roadmap that explained exactly what Moonshot did differently. They replaced the Adam optimizer, which had been the industry standard since 2014. They replaced the traditional attention mechanism from the original Transformer paper in 2017. And they replaced residual connections, a technique that has been standard since 2015. 3 core components of modern AI architecture, all replaced with new alternatives that Moonshot developed and then open-sourced for everyone to use. When Elon Musk saw the research paper on their attention residuals technique back in March, he reposted it and said Kimi's work is impressive. Moonshot's official account responded. Your rockets are pretty well built too. This is not a company that is intimidated by Silicon Valley. This is a company that is challenging Silicon Valley on its own terms. Now let me explain why this release caused a financial earthquake. When Kimi K3 went live, the Nasdaq suffered significant losses. The Philadelphia Semiconductor Index fell more than 20% from its late June peak, officially crossing into bear market territory on July 17th. Over $3.3 trillion in semiconductor market value evaporated. The reason is simple. American tech companies have been spending astronomical amounts of money on AI infrastructure. Hundreds of billions on chips, data centers, and compute. The entire investment thesis rests on the idea that AI models are so expensive to build and so difficult to train that only a handful of companies, mostly American ones, can compete at the frontier level. Kimi K3 shattered that thesis in a single afternoon. If a Chinese startup can build a model that matches or beats American models and then give it away for free, what exactly are investors paying for? Wall Street's reaction was fascinating. Several investment banks released research reports almost simultaneously. But instead of addressing the obvious questions, like whether American AI companies can maintain their pricing power, or whether developers will start migrating to cheaper alternatives, they pivoted to storage. Their argument was that bigger context windows mean more data needs to be stored. So companies like Micron and Western Digital will benefit. Memory stocks surged. The Round Hill Memory ETF jumped nearly 11% in a single day. SanDisk rose over 14%. Micron gained 12%. Some analysts pointed out that this pivot felt like a deflection. The most uncomfortable questions were being avoided entirely. Will Chinese models force American companies to drop their prices? Will developers start building on free Chinese alternatives instead of paying premium American rates? Will new AI companies choose not to start in Silicon Valley at all because the economics no longer make sense? These are existential questions for an industry that has attracted more than $1 trillion in investment over the past 3 years. And nobody on Wall Street wanted to be the first to answer them honestly. And then the politics exploded. Within hours of K3's release, Michael Kratsios, the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, went on social media and accused Moonshot AI of using techniques to steal from American AI models. He claimed the US had evidence that Moonshot built a sophisticated internal platform to distill American models at scale, rapidly switching between access methods to avoid detection. Anthropic's policy head followed with accusations of intellectual property theft and industrial espionage. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent signaled that sanctions and entity list controls could be on the table. The message from Washington was clear. This is not just a technology competition. This is a national security threat. Moonshot AI pushed back hard. Huang Zhengxin, the company's head of enterprise business, denied the distillation allegations in interviews with Chinese state media. He insisted that K3's performance comes entirely from original architectural innovations. Supporters of Moonshot pointed out an awkward timeline problem with Washington's claims. Anthropic's latest model had been released only days before K3 launched. The idea that Moonshot could distill a model, integrate the results, complete training, run evaluations, and launch a product all in a matter of days stretches credibility to the breaking point. Training a model of this scale takes months, not days. The architecture decisions, the data pipeline, the optimization choices, all of that was locked in long before Anthropic's model even existed. To anyone with a technical background, the timeline simply does not add up. But the accusations served a different purpose. They shifted the conversation from American companies failing to compete on price to Chinese companies supposedly cheating. That is a much more comfortable story for Washington to tell. But here is what made this controversy truly explosive. For the first time, Silicon Valley had an open, fierce public confrontation over whether open source AI is a good thing or a bad thing. And the people arguing were not random commentators. They were some of the most powerful figures in American technology and politics. On one side, the White House and policy hawks pushed for restrictions. OpenAI executive Dean Ball reportedly suggested using regulatory risk to deter adoption of Chinese AI models. Critics immediately called this monopolistic regulatory capture, an attempt to use government power to protect American companies from competition rather than to address any genuine security threat. On the other side stood Jensen Huang, the founder and CEO of NVIDIA, the world's largest AI chip supplier. His position was the exact opposite. He told Axios that Wall Street misread DeepSeek the first time, and now it is misreading K3. His logic was simple. Free AI is good for chips, good for data centers, good for hardware. Cheaper open source models mean more people and more businesses can use AI, which increases rather than decreases demand for computing infrastructure. He flatly stated there is no scenario where China drives US companies out. Zero possibility. He also rejected the claim that open source models leave backdoors for China, arguing that openness makes AI safer because external researchers can audit models, discover vulnerabilities, and build defenses. Former Trump AI advisor David Sachs sided with Huang. publicly criticizing the idea of using regulation to block Chinese models as exactly the kind of anti-competitive behavior the government should be preventing, not enabling. The tech world was watching the most powerful people in American industry argue in real time about whether the best response to Chinese AI advancement is to compete harder or to build walls. That debate is not settled. It may define the next decade of global technology policy. Meanwhile, something remarkable was happening on the ground in China. Within 48 hours of K3's launch, generating interactive applications using the model became a viral trend on Chinese social platforms. Users with zero programming experience were describing ideas in plain language and receiving fully functional interactive web pages within minutes. People were building games, tools, simulations, all through natural conversation with an AI. The demand was so overwhelming that Moonshot had to issue an emergency announcement on July 19th, suspending new consumer subscriptions because their computing resources were completely maxed out. They had to prioritize existing paying users just to keep the service running. That kind of organic viral adoption is something money cannot buy. It is proof of product market fit at a scale that most Silicon Valley startups spend years trying to achieve. People were not using K3 because they were told to. They were using it because it worked, because it turned their words into working software in minutes. Because for the first time, ordinary people who had never written a line of code in their lives could describe what they wanted and watch an AI build it for them in real time. That is not a benchmark score. That is a revolution in how humans interact with technology. And the financial trajectory of Moonshot AI tells the rest of the story. In March 2026, the company's annual recurring revenue was around $100 million. By April, it doubled to $200 million. By June, it hit $300 million. The company raised roughly $2 billion at a $20 billion valuation in May. Now it is in talks for a pre-IPO round at $31.5 billion, with plans to push to $50 billion before a Hong Kong listing that could happen before the end of 2026. State-backed Chinese investors are pouring in. China Mobile, CITIC Private Equity, and funds linked to China's National Social Security Fund are all involved. This is not just a startup anymore. This is a national champion backed by the full weight of China's institutional capital. The timing of K3's release was also no accident. Moonshot launched the model on July 16th, one day before Chinese President Xi Jinping opened the World Artificial Intelligence Conference in Shanghai. In his speech, Xi urged countries to seize the historic opportunity of open-source AI. The message was unmistakable. While the United States debates whether to restrict AI, China is positioning itself as the global champion of open access. For developing countries around the world that cannot afford to pay American prices for frontier AI, that pitch is extraordinarily compelling. Now let me bring all of this together and explain what it actually means for the future. The old narrative about AI was straightforward. America leads. America has the best chips, the most money, the deepest talent pool, and the biggest tech companies. Everyone else is playing catch-up. Kimi K3 does not completely destroy that narrative, but it puts a crack in it that cannot be ignored. China is now producing AI models that compete at the frontier level despite operating under severe hardware restrictions. US export controls have limited the kinds of chips Chinese companies can access. They cannot buy the most advanced NVIDIA GPUs. They are working with less computational power than their American counterparts. And yet, through architectural innovation, through clever engineering techniques like mixture of experts and novel attention mechanisms, they are closing the gap anyway. In some benchmarks, they have already closed it entirely. The cost differential is perhaps the most dangerous part of this equation for American companies. If Kimi K3 can deliver 95% of the performance of the best American models at 1/3 the cost, enterprise customers will notice. developers will notice. Startups that are choosing which AI to build their products on will notice. Cursor, the code tool that SpaceX is reportedly acquiring for roughly $60 billion, already runs its core Composer 2 system on Kimi K2.5. DoorDash has publicly stated it assigns lower-level tasks to Kimi models. These are not experiments. These are production deployments inside major American companies using Chinese AI. The release of open weights, scheduled for July 27th, adds another dimension. Once those weights are public, anyone in the world can download, modify, and deploy Kimi K3. Researchers can study it. Companies can fine-tune it for their specific needs. Governments can run it on their own infrastructure without any dependency on Moonshot or China. Alibaba released a preview of Qwen 3.8 within days of K3. That model has 2.4 trillion parameters, and Alibaba claims it is second only to one specific American model. Both of these systems are free and open weight. China is not producing one frontier model. It is producing multiple frontier models simultaneously and releasing them all openly. Here is what nobody in Silicon Valley wants to say out loud. The AI race is no longer a one-country competition. The gap between Chinese and American models is narrowing every single month. The cost advantage is already tilting toward China. The open-source strategy is winning developer hearts around the world. And the US government's primary response so far has been to accuse Chinese of stealing rather than to ask why American companies are charging 3 times more for comparable performance. That is the real shock. Not that China built a 2.8 trillion parameter model, but that they built it, matched the best in the world, and then decided the most powerful move was to give it away. Every assumption that justified trillion-dollar valuations for American AI companies is now under pressure. The assumption that only American labs can build frontier models, broken. The assumption that enormous spending creates an unbreakable competitive moat, broken. The assumption that export controls would keep China years behind, broken. And the assumption that the best AI would always command premium pricing. That is breaking right now in real time as developers around the world discover that a free Chinese model can do what they used to pay thousands of dollars a month to access. The AI industry will never be the same. And the companies that understand this fastest will be the ones that survive what comes next.